I want to start with a story. In the year 65 AC, a little bit after, around 100 years after the foundation of the Roman Empire, the philosopher Musonius Rufus, you see here, the statue that is supposedly portraying him, the Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus was sent into exile by the emperor, the vicious emperor known as Nero. He was sent into exile to an island called Gyaros, which you can see its picture here. It's not exactly Ibiza, right? And just to put it also in context, this same island was considered harsh, arid, lack of human culture. 50 years earlier, another emperor named Tiberius refused to send someone to that island because he said it was too brutal, too harsh. And yet, just a second, let me mute some. Sure, can you do the muting and all that? Okay, thank you. Anyway, Nero didn't care about those things, and he sent Rufus to the island. But Musonius Rufus, even though he was sent to an exile to this island, which was arid and lifeless, he managed to install a farm there. He managed to develop a small community of philosophers who came especially to the island to study with him. And in a few months, this deserted island became sort of a center of philosophy, an unlikely center of philosophy. When he was asked afterwards about this experience of being in exile, this is what he said. Certainly, the person who is exiled is not prevented from possessing courage and justice simply because he is banished, nor is he denied self-control or any virtue that brings honor and benefit to the man with a good reputation and worthy of praise. Now, we also have to take in consideration that exile for Romans was, let's say, it was almost as worse as death, as a punishment. Imagine that I'm telling you from today to tomorrow, you have to leave everything behind, go to some deserted island, leave your family, leave your friends, leave your stuff. It's not an easy experience, yeah? And a lot of people considered exile as something that is terrible, that is the worst punishment possible except death. But what Musonius Rufus tells us in this talk, he says that there's nothing about the change of the external circumstances that prevents us from expressing courage, justice, self-control, all these things that we can call virtues or strength or inner strength. There's nothing about this change of circumstances that prevents us from doing so. Now, some years later, this same philosopher Rufus, Musonius Rufus, which is not so well known today, became a teacher of another Stoic philosopher who is much more famous today, and that philosopher's name is Epictetus. And Epictetus summed up the teachings of his master, Musonius Rufus, with these words. And this is, in a way, a summary of this art that we're going to talk about today, the art of transforming obstacles, of transforming difficulties into opportunities. And Epictetus said, every obstacle in life presents us with an opportunity to turn inward and to invoke our own submerged inner resources. The trials we endure can and should introduce us to our strengths. Every obstacle in life presents us with an opportunity to turn inward and to invoke our own submerged inner resources. The trials we endure can and should introduce us to our strengths. This is the summary of this art of transforming obstacles into opportunities. This is what we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, I would like to give a short introduction to Stoicism as a school of philosophy. It's going to help us understand a little bit more about this art itself. I don't know if you have some background, if you came without any knowledge, maybe this will be something you already know, but please bear with me for those who have no background in Stoicism. So, Stoicism is a school of philosophy as a way of life. It was founded around 300 BC by a philosopher named Zeno in Greece, in Athens, and it continued for about 500 years until the last famous Stoic philosopher in history, which we see here in the picture, who is Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor. I would like to explain a little bit what does a school of philosophy as a way of life means. So Stoicism actually was not the only school of philosophy that developed in Greece after the death of Socrates. There was actually a flourishing or a flowering of several schools of philosophy. The Cynics, the Stoics, the Megarians, the Academians, all of them had different approaches to life. They presented the aim of life a little bit differently, but they all had something in common, which is that they were all schools of philosophy as a way of life. Today, when we speak about philosophy, a lot of times we have this idea of this sort of intellectual discipline, theoretical discipline, and a sort of accumulation of interesting ideas, of knowledge, of knowing about different philosophers and what they said and what were their theories. But the original schools of philosophy did integrate a theoretical aspect, but for them, philosophy was a combination of theory and the way of life. Theory and practice. They integrated guidelines, exercises, a certain way of conduct, a code of honor in a way to live life according to certain theoretical principles. So each of these schools of philosophy has certain theoretical principles that they all sort of agreed on. And these theoretical principles were expressed in the way of life, in the way they lived their everyday life. So philosophy wasn't just about, okay, understanding different ideas or theorizing about the world, or I don't know, maybe we're some kind of holograms, maybe we're that, maybe we're that. No, it was sort of certain principles and bringing them into experience. And by doing so, getting closer to understanding ourselves, getting closer to understand the world, society, changing ourselves, because the way of life means to change ourselves, and by doing so, to change those around us. This is something that all these schools of philosophy had in common. And the Stoics, as an example, they didn't just want to theorize about life, they want to live life better. So the things we'll talk about today wasn't just theory for them. These were things that they actually tried to apply in their everyday lives. Now, Acropolis, I didn't say anything about Acropolis, but Acropolis is also a school of philosophy as a way of life, sort of a rebirth of this kind of style of philosophy. And that's why I put a little bit of a sort of a postcard here to show this connection. Yeah. And in the same way, when I'm presenting these ideas here today, I'm not doing it because I went to the internet, research some ideas and summarize them, and I'm not now going to present them to you, but these are ideas that in my personal experience, I tried myself to apply and try to apply, and I find that they are useful. And that's why I want to share them, because I think they have use. I myself don't consider myself a Stoic per se, because I see myself as an eclectic philosopher, in the sense that I choose the best ideas from different schools of philosophy, and that's part of the principles the Acropolis works upon. But I find that there are a lot of very useful principles in Stoicism that we can adopt, especially today in times of, in the times that we're living in, which are not simple times, right? We can all agree on that. So, as I said, Stoicism lasted for about 500 years on the pages of history. So that's a long time. Think about it, 500 years. It started in Greece and reached its apex, its peak in ancient Rome, in the Roman Republic first, and then in the Roman Empire. And we actually don't know a lot about the philosophy of the early Stoics. We have very few fragments left from these times, and also from the middle Stoics. What we have the most information about is the philosophy of the Stoics of the late Roman Empire. And these are the most famous Stoic philosophers. These are Epictetus, that we mentioned before, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Musonius Rufus. These are more or less the 3 or 4 Stoics that we know the most about their teachings, but they, in their writings, they speak about the earliest Stoics and the earlier Stoics. And what we see there is that they are inspired by the Stoics that were before them. And each of them had their own Stoic masters or teachers who gave them instructions, who taught them Stoicism, who taught them philosophy, and who were sort of a living example of what Stoicism means. And that was the principle of teacher-disciple that existed in Stoicism, which was this idea that I don't just read about it in books. I have a teacher that shows me what is this way of life, that gives me an example of what is this way of life. Not necessarily, this teacher is not necessarily a sage or a perfect human being, but a person who tries to live these principles to the best of their ability. Yeah. So, let's see, I don't even remember what did I put in the next. Oh yeah. So let's now go to the heart of our talk today, from obstacle to opportunity. And I want to clarify a few things about both these words, obstacle and opportunity. Today, when we speak about opportunity, usually because of the nature of our times, usually this is going to be in the context of either a business opportunity, financial opportunity, career opportunity. This is the zeitgeist. This is the nature of our times. Everything is considered in that focus. How can I promote my career? How can I get more money? And so on and so on. And also when we speak about problems and obstacles, we usually consider them in that context, in that framework. Now, I have to say that for the Stoics, these topics of financial success, personal success and promotion were not the center of their teachings, and that was not the center of their worries and preoccupations. When the Stoics speaks about opportunities, they don't speak about business opportunities, they speak about opportunities to grow as a human being. Opportunities to become better people, to nurture virtue. Virtue, I know it's a little bit archaic term, sometimes too lofty for us, but it comes from the word virility or strength, and maybe that would be an easier word to work with, which is an inner strength. We can consider virtue as a different word for an inner strength, and we all have different inner strengths. And for the Stoics, the opportunities they discussed were opportunities to develop these inner strengths. And for the Stoics, more about talking about personal success. They talked more about duty. D-U-T-Y, duty. Another word that is sounds a little bit maybe harsh to us, because we usually connect duty with either military service or something like that. But for them, the word duty means, what do I owe to life? What do I owe to those around me? What do I owe to my family, to my friends, to my work, to everything, to all my circumstances in life? What are my responsibilities in life? How can I carry out my responsibilities in the best way? How can I be present in my responsibilities? And I also have a responsibility for myself, not just for others. What is my responsibility for my soul, for my higher self? Yeah, these are all duties. I am part of this life. I am part of this world. What does that mean? How can I live this life fully? How can I live this life in a way that when I get to the end of my life, which I will one day, I will look back and say, okay, I'm at peace with everything I've accomplished. I feel that I've done my best. And maybe not, we don't need to think about the end of our lives, but even the end of the day. Marcus Aurelius said, live every day as if it were your last. And what he meant by that, not in the sense of party every day until you drop, but in the sense of when you get to the end of the day, you can say to yourself, okay, what did I do today? Was it a full day, a fully realized day? Am I at peace with my actions, with the actions that I took today, with my words, with the things I said to other people? So when the Stoics speak about obstacle and opportunity, they speak about it in a little bit different context than what we would speak about today, maybe usually. But it will be wrong, in my opinion, to try and take their ideas and try to force our own worldview on them. I think what we should try to do is to try and think, okay, what we can take from them to us. Maybe there is a point about what they're saying about looking for opportunities for inner growth, for becoming better people. And when they speak about our obstacles, they speak about obstacles in fulfilling ourselves as human beings. Now, let's look at this, what I said, through an interesting graph here. I'm going to ask you a question. Please feel free to answer. Look at all these things around the middle circle. What do all of them have in common?
I feel like, let's see, something, disease. What do they all have in common?
Oh, I see people are answering also on the chat. Sorry, I wasn't attentive to the chat.
I feel like everything relates to either how we feel within ourselves, within our form, or how other people perceive us.
Okay, so we have certain aspects of that, like good and bad reputation, and noble and low birth, and beauty and ugliness. But we also have health and disease, and life and death.
What's given and what's not given.
What's given and what's not given?
That's
you mean
right.
Circumstances that we are given, and what do you mean by that? Who was it? I can't.
Well, that was my husband.
Oh.
I put in dualities in the chat.
Dualities.
I'm just going back to the garden.
They all relate to the physical body.
They all relate to the physical
they
body
have
in a way,
their they're all things that are outside of our control.
Mm,
Yeah, I put dualities. So
okay.
like opposites or
Mhm.
seeming to be opposites.
Mm-hmm. So all these things, we can say there are circumstances of our lives, right? External circumstances of our life.
They can be improved upon. Some of
So
them.
on one hand, there are circumstances of our life. On the other hand, they are not completely under our control, like someone said here.
Yep.
Yeah. What do I mean by that? So think about our situation right now. Let's look at health and disease, for example. We are now in a situation where everybody's worried about health naturally. And we have some control over that, right? We can try and put masks and close ourselves in our houses and disconnect from everybody else. But I don't know, maybe we close ourselves in our house, we don't get enough vitamin D, and then we become sick from something else. Yeah.
Right.
Or we can try and control our exposure to other people's germs and so on, but it's not 100%, and we become ill anyway. Or yeah. Or for example, another situation that we see that we can develop a certain business and have a lot of money and so on, and suddenly something like this comes and completely closes everything. And a lot of businesses, for example, that were very successful before the COVID suddenly went bankrupt, right? And I'm sure that a lot of people a year ago never even imagined this situation is possible. So wealth and poverty is also not in our control completely. Yeah? And if we look at each of these circumstances, we will see that yes, we have influence over them to some extent, but we don't have complete control over them. Always something can happen and it changes. So in a way, the Stoics said the circumstances of our lives are not completely under our control, and we have to recognize that. And they called all these different things adiaphora, which means, I'll write it in the chat. Let's see if I can do that. Which means indifference. So life and death, nobody decides where they are going, when and where they are going to be born. And most of us don't decide where and how we're going to die. We don't decide our external appearance, right? Our health and disease is not completely under our control. Whether we are born to a poor or rich family, it's not in our control. Whether we're wealthy or poor, we can have some influence over that. But again, not under our control. Pleasure and pain, the same way. Good and bad reputation. We can be very good people and still have all kinds of fake news or all kinds of people spreading misinformation about us that results in bad reputation. We can be very bad people and still have good reputation because we know that's how it works. Strength and weakness, here it's physical strength and weakness, yeah? And not the inner strength and weakness. Strength and weakness also not completely under our control, yeah? And all these things for the Stoics were adiaphora, indifferent. Indifferent in the sense that the Stoic person, the philosopher, has to develop a certain sense of indifference to these things, a certain sense of detachment from these things. We also have to take in consideration that the Stoics lived in the Roman period. They didn't have a sheltered existence in the Roman times. Children, the mortality rate of children were much higher. Almost every Roman participated in battles, was in the military, saw death. They were much more exposed to illnesses, pestilences, plagues. So for them, death and illness and battle and pleasure and pain and so on, all of these were much more present in their lives. So you could even say that it's probably more difficult to detach from all these things. But actually the Stoics tried and say, we need to find a sort of, to recognize that these things are not in our control and to train ourselves in worrying less about them. Now, at the same time, they said, yes, it is better to have some money than not to have money at all. And that is what they called preferred indifference and unpreferred indifference. What does that mean? So if you see in the duality here, obviously it's going to be a natural selection of most people, natural preference to have wealth than to have poverty, or to be healthy than to be sick, or to be beautiful than to be ugly, or to be alive than to die. Yeah, most people will have a natural preference to one side of these dualities, to have a good reputation and not a bad reputation. And the Stoics recognized that. They said, yeah, it's natural that we'll prefer pleasure over pain, wealth over poverty, health over disease. And there's no problem with that. And that's okay. But the only caveat here is that the important thing are not the preferred indifference, but the thing that should be in the center of our lives is the cultivation of virtue, the health and well-being of our soul. You can choose and act in order to have health, in order to be wealthy, in order to be alive. That's natural, of course. But the most important, the highest priority in our lives should be the cultivation of virtue. We all choose priorities in life. Everybody has priorities in life, yeah, whether they're conscious or unconscious. What do you mean by that? I mean that our life in a way is a reflection of our priorities. The things that we give the most attention to, the most reflection to, the most time, effort, these are our highest priorities. Sometimes we choose these priorities consciously. Sometimes we let life choose them for us. We don't think about them so much, and we find ourselves in certain circumstances and giving a lot of time and thought and effort to something that we didn't really choose. Yeah. Yes, Alexis, do you have a question?
My question is, and maybe you're going to answer this. Were they focusing on like the cultivation of virtue being the center at our lives because that is what we could control, thus a better way to spend our energy, or did it relate to thoughts about the afterlife or anything like that?
And there are two reasons. I mean, more than one reason is to the reason they put virtue in the center. First is really what you said. And because all of these things are not under our control, the only thing that is truly or potentially under our control is our possibility to react, to act, to control the way we think, the way we act, and so on. And therefore, it's the rational thing, the reasonable thing to do is to dedicate our time and effort and our priorities to that which is naturally under our control. Yeah. If someone would say to you, okay, I'm going to spend the whole day tomorrow to try and change the weather. I don't like the weather in Chicago. It's always raining. So I'm going to sit all day tomorrow and just pray and do all kinds of ceremonies or whatever to try and change the weather so it will be sunny and not rainy. You would say, okay, that's an interesting choice of how you want to spend your time. but you probably won't think that that's going to be a useful way to spend the time, right? To try and change the weather. Why? Because we recognize that we don't have control over the weather, at least not individually. Maybe as a collective, we do have some control or some influence, but individually, we don't have any influence over the weather, yeah? In the same way, the Stoics said the reasonable things to do is let's focus on the things that are in our control, and that is ourselves, our reactions, our possibility to develop virtues, and so on. And the second reason is that they said that is the human thing to do. The human, because for them, the human being was a rational, reasonable being. That's what makes the human being unique. And the human being is the only being that actually can reflect on his actions and choose how to react and choose how to behave. And be able to sort of disconnect from the circumstances to a certain level and transcend them. Yeah. So for example, we can feel pain, right? And we can react in different ways. If someone feels pain, it can be debilitating. And another person can choose, okay, I will transcend my pain. I will do something despite the pain that I'm feeling because I have to do it. A human being can say, yes, that thing is pleasurable to me. It makes me feel pleasure, but it's actually not so good for me. I'd rather not do that. So a human being can choose the reactions to those different circumstances. That's a good question. Thank you. So, yes.
I think one aspect of that question, actually, if I'm not mistaken, was the fact of the motivation for pursuing virtue versus the other external factors. If I recall correctly, the question also brought the point as to whether they follow the virtues because of what would that do to their life after death, or if it was just because it's a human.
Can you repeat that, please?
The motivation for pursuing the virtues, as I have heard and understood, is internal cultivation that comes from within and not as a fear of what that might bring on life and the afterlife, after death, with like the divinity and all that. I think that was part of the question, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so the afterlife for the Stoics was not a central element. For them, after the person dies, sort of goes back to the cosmos, to the what they spoke about, God or Zeus or the mind of the cosmos. They didn't have, to be honest, a real developed metaphysical theory. For that, you have to approach more Eastern philosophy or Plato, where you find a more developed metaphysical philosophy. The Stoics are very much focused on ethics. Yeah, that's why they are very popular today, because they are very practical, very pragmatic, but they're not perfect. They lacked certain aspects of philosophy. They didn't develop certain aspects of philosophy. That's why, as I said before, I'm more of an eclectic philosopher. But again, they have a lot of principles that I think that can be applied and help us today. Another way they explain this this balance between the virtue and the other indifference is this kind of sort of image, which is these scales. And in these scales, we can see that the indifference are over here, and the virtue or inner strength is here. Yeah. And their idea was that it doesn't matter how many indifference you're going to put here, it's never going to outweigh the virtue or the inner strength, whether it's positive or negative. So let's give you an example. So we said before, for example, wealth and poverty is indifferent. Now, we work in life, we may want to have more property or more money and so on, and that's fine. But the moment this decision, let's say we are facing a decision in which we have to choose between an ethical reaction, between applying an inner strength or virtue, or between, let's say, lose a job or making less money or so on, for the Stoics, you always have to choose the choice of the soul, which is the choice of the virtue, of the inner strength. If there is no collision between the preferred indifferent, like wealth, and your ethics, then by all means, go for wealth, go for money, go for whatever you want to get. But the moment there is a collision, a conflict between your inner axis, your ethics, your principles, the virtues that we didn't speak about but are mentioned here, of wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, that we'll mention in a sec. The moment there is a conflict between these virtues and the indifference, then you have to choose the virtues. Okay. Another example, good reputation and bad reputation. Am I going to do something right even though I'm going to get a bad reputation? Or I'm going to do something that is wrong, or something that is just not what I want to do, what I feel that is right to do, only because people will not like me or people will gossip about me? Yeah. So the Stoics will set the center, virtue, good and bad reputation, indifferent. If you have good reputation, great, keep it, work for it, and so on. But you don't really have full control over it. If you have to choose between reputation and virtue, you have to choose virtue. That is what's going also to give you, another reason they spoke about virtue, is that they believe that the path to happiness, what they called eudaimonia, which is a little bit different than what we call happiness. The path to eudaimonia, to happiness, inner fulfillment, inner flourishing, which is different from that feeling of, that transient feeling of joy that we may have, I don't know, after resting well or eating a good meal or meeting someone we like. Eudaimonia is a sort of an inner state of mind, of happiness, a continuous state of mind, inner peace. Yeah, and you can only achieve that, according to the Stoics, only if you live a life of virtue. In that sense, they were very much in agreement with Plato. Okay. Now, how does this relate to from obstacle to opportunity? So, let's say we meet an obstacle in life. What is an obstacle? Anything that prevents us from fulfilling ourselves, from realizing ourselves, from living a full life, from fulfilling our duties in life. And you know what, before we go to this, I want to go back to this quote that I mentioned before. So we said that every obstacle presents us with an opportunity to turn inward and to invoke our own submerged inner resources. So let's say we have a coworker we don't like, or we have a noisy neighbor, or we have, for example, we want to speak in public, but we have a fear of crowds, a fear of stage fright, and so on. Yeah, all these things are obstacles. They can be external obstacles, they can be internal obstacles. Now, these obstacles are an opportunity, according to the Stoic, to find our inner strengths and to bring them out, to find what we can call our latent powers. Latent means sleeping, dormant, something that is in potential within us. Yeah, to bring them out from inside of us. Let's think about the great philosophers, the great leaders, people you consider as people that inspire you. Why do they inspire you? Because they have certain qualities, they have certain strengths. Usually people don't inspire us because of their weaknesses, right? We don't look at someone and say, wow, I wish I was as lazy as that person, or I wish I was as jealous or envious as that person. No, we usually look at the person that inspires us and we say, wow, that person is really charismatic, or that person is really brave, or that person is really strong, or compassionate, or whatever strength we want to think about. Yeah. And if we look at these people, I'm sure each of you has someone like that in mind. Where do they have these qualities from? Now, obviously, they didn't buy it in the store. They didn't order it in Amazon. They didn't get it somewhere outside of themselves, right? They got it from inside of themselves. It was within themselves. Now, are we different? Do we not have the same qualities inside of ourselves? Are these qualities only exist with certain people? Does courage is a genetic quality, inherited genetic quality that only exists with certain people? Is compassion or diligence a genetic quality that only exists with certain people? Or is it something that we all have in potential? Well, that's a question that's hard to answer, but I would say what I believe, that I think that all of us have them in potential, because we can't get them anywhere else. Yeah. And the Stoics said that these are all qualities that we can nurture, that we can nourish, that we can train, right? Okay, I don't have courage right now, but if I'll start building courage every day, doing a little exercise of courage, and that is exactly what we spoke about when I said philosophy is a way of life. If every day I practice a little bit of courage, yeah. And Eleanor Roosevelt said, and this is a tip I adopted to my own life: every day do something that you're afraid of. Every day do one thing that you're afraid of. This is, for me, a practice to develop courage. Yeah, so you start with small things, okay, to call that person, to speak with another person, to, I don't know, whatever you're afraid of. And then you go and continue and build something that is bigger and bigger and bigger until you become a person that is brave or courageous, or at least other people see you in that way, because you're just yourself, right? And this courage, where was it before? It was inside of us, but only in potential, because we haven't brought it out, we haven't trained it. Now, when we meet an obstacle in life, this obstacle sort of forces us to bring out these latent powers, these latent virtues. Because if we're just living in comfort, if everything is comfortable, if there is no problem, if everything is quiet and nice, and life is sort of just flowing, because we don't really, because we're avoiding conflicts, because we don't really challenge ourselves, because we're just staying in our own comfort zone, then yeah, everything is going to be in sort of a peace, sort of a fake peace, sort of a very comfortable peace. But we aren't going to develop our inner strengths, because we're not going to face a challenge. We're not going to face a trial. Yeah. But if we dare to live life fully, if we dare to go after our dreams, if we dare to challenge ourselves, then yes, we're going to face some walls. We're going to face some difficult people, maybe. We're going to face our own difficult personality, which is the greatest challenge, more than other people, much more than other people. We're going to face all these different aspects of ourselves that we didn't know, because we didn't have the courage to face. Suddenly we're going to find out that we're not maybe as courageous as we thought we were, or not as patient as we thought we were, or not able to concentrate as we thought we were. But this exactly is the opportunity to discover it and then to start building those inner qualities. So if I'm facing this obstacle, this wall, I have to think, okay, I'm facing a wall. What am I going to do? I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to go away because I can't do anything. There's a wall and I'm not going to do anything about that. Or I'm going to see, okay, maybe I can climb the wall. Maybe I can find a way to build a door into the wall, or to go around the wall, or to dig under the wall. I'm going to find a way to face this challenge. And this is going to force me to bring out something from within myself. And for the Stoics, the most important thing wasn't to overcome the wall. The most important thing was, what am I going to bring out of myself because of the wall? Even if for 100 years I'm facing this wall and fighting and going around and digging and nothing works, I'm still going to develop something inside of myself, and that's the important thing. And maybe I will, at a certain point, be able to break that wall. Yeah? Think about, have you seen the movies Shawshank Redemption? How do you say it in English? Shawshank Redemption? Shawshank, sorry. Shawshank Redemption. Do you remember? Okay, if you haven't seen, I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but for those of you who have seen the movie, I'm sure all of you have seen the movie, but just in case not everybody saw the movie, do you remember what happened in the end? Yeah, you had to work with a certain wall, right? And with a lot of patience. Yeah, and that's sort of what we have to do with our lives a lot of times. Yeah. There is no guarantee to success. The Stoics said there is no guarantee to success. So today we say, follow your dreams. Everybody said that, right? Follow your dreams, follow your hearts, do the things that you want to do, and so on. But there is no guarantee that if you do that, you're going to succeed. Right? Because all these things around us, good and bad reputation, wealth and poverty, all these, and we can add success to this. Material success or artistic success or whatever we want to, occupational success, it's not completely in our control. But it doesn't matter. We have to do it anyway. It doesn't matter if we have control over success or not. We have to do it anyway, because this is the only way we are able to develop our inner virtues, our inner qualities. If we just sit at home and sort of settle for this kind of life of comfort, life of just doing what is expected of us, just doing what life sort of, we just fell on something and we're just doing it because this is how life is and so on. We're not really challenging ourselves. We're not really going to develop our potentials. Let's see an example that Epictetus gives us. If you encounter an attractive person, then self-restraint is the resource needed. If pain or weakness, then stamina. If verbal abuse, then patience. So these are all kinds of things that can come up in life. Yeah. So let's say you're a married person and you encounter an attractive person. Yeah. And then self-restraint would be a good option to take, right? If pain or weakness, but you still have to do what you have to do, you still have duties in life, right? Then stamina. Okay, I'll do it even though I'm weak, I feel pain. Verbal abuse, patience. Yeah. It's not going to help anybody if you're just going to get into a sort of a conflict with the other person. It's not going to help you. As time goes by and you build on the habit of matching the appropriate inner resource to each incident, you will not tend to get carried away by life's appearances. You will stop feeling overwhelmed so much of the time. So this here, we go into another aspect of Stoicism. Of course, in 1 hour, we can't really cover the whole doctrine of Stoicism because it's a whole system of life. But what we can say here when we said you will tend not to get carried away by life's appearances, a lot in Stoicism is about the value judgments we give to the things we experience in life. So a lot of times we experience certain things and then we sort of interpret them in a certain way, yeah? So let's say, for example, we meet someone or a friend says something to us and we interpret that thing. For example, we can interpret it as sort of, they try to offend us, they try to hurt us. But in reality, that person didn't mean anything by what they said. They didn't mean to hurt us, maybe completely the opposite. But we don't see reality as it is. We see reality filtered by our emotions and our thoughts. And therefore, we act a lot of times according to false value judgments, false interpretations of reality. And what Epictetus says here is that as we develop these kind of sort of resources to react to every kind of obstacle, we'll start to develop a sort of inner discernment, the ability to say, okay, let's look at reality as it is and not as we interpret it, not influenced so much by my emotions. Yeah. The last thing I want to show you for today is this interesting thing that from Donald Robertson. Donald Robertson is a sort of an expert. Today, like I said, the Stoicism is experiencing a resurgence of popularity because it's very practical, because it gives a lot of tools in regard to difficulties and crises and times of crisis. Let us not forget that Stoicism reached its height in the beginning of in the first century, where Roman Empire was ruled under very cruel dictators, and life was not easy for the nobility at that time, and they used Stoicism to face these trials. Yeah. And today we are not living in easy times as well, not just because of the virus, right? There are a lot of social circumstances that are difficult for a lot of people. Let us say we're not living in a golden age, yeah? And therefore the Stoicism is very popular today. And Donald Robertson wrote this very interesting sort of application of these ideas of Stoicism into a code of honor, which is very simple and a very, very simple sort of guidelines to how to apply these 4 virtues that were the center of Stoic teachings that they adopted from Plato. Plato brought up this, was the first one who brought these 4 virtues as sort of the central virtues. And he took it and sort of translated it into 4 principles. So the virtue of wisdom, love the truth and seek wisdom. In other words, be a philosopher. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. Philo is love, Sophia is wisdom. So to be a philosopher means the lover of wisdom, to be a seeker of wisdom. And we can't really separate wisdom and truth. They are 2 aspects of the same thing. So the first principle, love the truth and seek wisdom. In other words, be a philosopher. On the other, related to justice, act with justice, fairness, and kindness towards others. So it's not just about ourselves, it's also about how we act with other people. Do we act justly? And justly means impartially. It means exactly that our emotions or our likes and dislikes don't affect the way we act towards others. Yeah, we need to sort of act in a way that is equanimous, sort of with equanimity. Yeah, Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor, imagine a Roman emperor with all the work of a Roman emperor, writes in his meditations, in his book of reflections about his everyday battle, struggle, with all the people who come to him with requests and questions and wanting to get things from him, and his everyday struggle to act with justice and fairness and kindness to every person who comes to him, whether he likes them or not personally, it's not important. The important thing is to be just toward them, fair. Yeah. So that's the principle of justice. Courage, very simple. Yeah. Not to let our fears guide us in life. To master our fears, it doesn't mean that our fears are going to disappear, because to do something we're not afraid of is not courageous, right? And we know the Wizard of Oz. We all seen the Wizard of Oz or read the Wizard of Oz with the lion. And it's not about not having fears. It's about doing something despite having fears, taking our fears in the hand in hand, and walking forward anyway. That's what it means to be courageous, yeah? And temperance. Actually, temperance is not exactly the right translation, but there is no right translation to that word in Greek. So it's more about self-control, self-discipline. It means to know yourself, to know what is the right thing for you, what is too much, what is too little. And in a way, it's a sort of justice towards ourselves. It means to recognize what we need, or in other words, to recognize that what we need is not necessarily what we want. They're not necessarily the same thing. Sometimes we desire things that we don't need. And sometimes we need things that we don't desire. Yeah. So for example, we can be in a certain situation that life puts us in, which challenges us, which is difficult for us, and yet we need that situation. It's a situation that helps us grow, that promotes our inner growth, which is maybe difficult for us to accept because we don't like it, we don't enjoy it, but it's actually helping us in life. Yeah. So these are 4 interesting principles. We can say that they are more important than any other indifferent. And to summarize, we can also say that none of these principles depend on other people. No one else can force us or make us not to act with justice, or not to master our fears, or not to be temperate, or have self-discipline. All of these principles depend only on us, and therefore we have control over them, as opposed to all the indifference. And as we are going to, I would say, a period of instability, a period of that we don't really know what's going to happen, how is the future going to unfold. I think it's a wise outlook to focus on what we can do. And what we can do is change ourselves, is to try and live the best way possible, try to live ethically, even if the circumstances are difficult, even if the people around us don't make it easy for us, even if society is not completely ethical. These are the things that we can't control. We can't control whether our society is going to be ethical or not. We can influence that, definitely, and that's what the Stoics try to do. But we don't have complete control. Even Marcus Aurelius, who was the strongest, most powerful person in the empire, an emperor, he wasn't able to control completely the ethical actions of all those around him, whether those around him act ethically or unethically. And the proof to that is that after he died, his son continued him, and that son was not very ethical. And he was influenced by all kinds of unethical advisors, and eventually he brought the beginning of the fall of the empire. Yeah. So in a way, he couldn't even control the continuity of his ethics through his own children, right? So what we do have control over is our own inner access, our own decisions, our own conduct, our own reactions. And this is the art of transforming obstacles into opportunity. To take those difficult things outside, transform them into an opportunity to become better people, to grow inside. So this is what I wanted to share today. I know it's just, it's the tip of the iceberg, as we said, but I want to hear you. So let's take a 2 minutes break. And if you are interested for the second part, for questions and answers, and to hear more about our study program and the course that we're offering in June, please stick around. Otherwise, thank you for coming.